Okay, so now that we have understood the we've understood the basics as to how the economies are classified and the structure of economy as such. So we will now understand as to what are the factors that are affecting it. The structure of economy, that is factors such as contribution of different sectors like primary sector, which is the agriculture, secondary, which is the industrial and the tertiary sector, large, medium, small, tiny sectors to the economy and their linkages, integration with the world economy are important to business because why? Because these factors indicate the prospects for different types of business. That is, certain factors which affect business more. So, for example, now if an economy, let us look at the slide. So let us look at this slide. So if, for example, if an economy is highly integrated with the global economy, it will be quickly affected by the developments in the global economy. Normally, as an economy develops, the share of primary sector in the GDP and employment declines and those of other sectors increase. After a certain stage, the share of manufacturing sector may also decline. Like for example, if you look at India, you would see the scenario happening very lively in India. The developed economies are primarily service economies, in the sense that the service sector is likely to generate the bulk of employment and income. Whereas the contribution again of the services to GDP and employment again is going to be higher. The nature of each sector definitely thus has business implications. For example, although India is one of the largest producer of several agricultural products, but because of the small and fragmented nature of land holdings, efficient collection and processing of the produce has become difficult. You will see that the land holdings in India is fragmented. You will see small land holdings and why do we say small? Because we are comparing it with the developed economies. The landholding pattern also makes the productivity improvements difficult. It also has implications on the agriculture inputs. The tremendous growth of trade in services and more recently in electronic commerce, which is also known as e-commerce, is a part of the new trade pattern. Exports of commercial services have been growing on every continent, and particularly in Asia, you would see it happening majorly. This change has its own special significance. And what is that? That is the rise of services. Services are now frequently used in production of goods and in other services. Like one service actually complements the other service. Now let us take this example. Say for example, if you're talking about an e-commerce, an e-commerce platform like Amazon can never survive without a logistics supplier. The person who would be responsible for sourcing the product from the supplier, packaging it, and then shipping it to the customer. That is one process. The other process is the reverse logistics, which is shipping back to the supplier. The customer rejects. So what happens? The logistics provider picks up the package and ships it back to the supplier. This is never not possible. It's not going to happen. Amazon is not going to survive without the logistics provider. Very, very, very. So you would see that services complement each other. Enhanced international competition in services means what? It means reduction in prices and improvements in quality. And this enhances the competitiveness of whom? Of the downstream industries. Both industrial and developing economies have much to gain by opening their markets. That is, reduction of the tariffs. Developing countries would derive large gains from easing of barriers to agricultural products and to labor intensive construction and maritime service. Over the long term, electronic business will loom large as an area where expanding opportunities for trade would require an expanding framework of rules. General economic conditions definitely affect the business. And what are these conditions? You could see it as listed as income levels, distribution of income, GDP trends, sectoral growth trends, demand and supply trends, price trends, trade and what is BOP? Balance of payment, foreign exchange reserves position, and global economic trends. Economies usually pass through boom and recession. A boom, what is a boom? Boom is characterized by high level of output, employment, and rising demand and prices. What is recession? Recession is opposite of all. It is characterized by low level of output, unemployment, high unemployment, and low demand. So if a region depends to a significant extent on a particular industry or sector, business in that region would significantly be affected. By whom? By the fortunes of that particular industry. The economic and business prospects in major oil exporting countries depend on what? To a large extent on the crude oil prices. Again, in some regions, it might be also related to major crops in a particular region as such. So, if you really see a recession in the US economy is likely to have repercussions in all the economies as such. So, the current account and balance payment positions of a country can significantly influence the economic policies. For example, a sustained current account surplus may encourage the government to liberalize imports and capital movement. Exports and imports of a country are generally affected by a number of domestic international economic conditions. For example, analysis of empirical data reveals that India's export performance is affected by certain important factors. They include external factors, internal factors, as well as the real exchange rate. So, what are the external factors? That is, the rate of growth of economies of the important importing countries, rate of growth in the world trade. So world trade, if the growth is happening, then these are the factors which impact the economy as such. Rate of change in price level in the importing country. Internal factors, the rate of growth of Indian economy, rate of change in domestic price levels. The most favorable condition for growth of Indian exports, if you really see, is a combination of what? Is a combination of high growth rates for all the three external factors. A high growth rate with price stability for the Indian economy, a fall in the real exchange rate of exports. Again, if some of these mentioned conditions are satisfied and other conditions are not favorable, the export performance should be expected to be determined by what? By the relative strengths of the favorable and unfavorable factors. Again, we will have the worst situation when the reverse of ideal combination and conditions occur. The analysis of the impact of interrelationships of these mentioned variables on the Indian exports for nearly 2 decades. And this was actually studied by an author called G.C. Da Costa. And his findings are very interesting, and I'll mention these findings to you. One is that a good growth in economies of industrial countries has been associated with good growth in Indian exports. This has been very pronounced in those years characterized by good growth in world trade, sharp fall in the real exchange rate of exports. Now, how do we actually, what is the term that we use for this real exchange rate for exports? It is REREX, RERX. And the relative price stability in India, low growth or recessionary conditions in the economies of industrial countries, along with depressed world trade together, with even moderate increases in REREX, did not provide any competitive edge to the country's exports. And this is what De Costa actually has found out. Again, that is, the volume of Indian exports broadly kept pace with the growth in the economies of the industrial conditions. The third finding, in some years, even when the growth in the economies of industrial countries was low, the country experienced good growth in the volume of exports because of what? Because of sharp decline in the REREX. During certain periods, despite modest growth in industrial countries and in world trade, the volume of Indian exports fell because of the rise in REREX. Besides, import regulations, the important factors which determined the volume of Indian imports were the rate of growth of Indian economy, that is, high growth rate, again associated with rise in imports, relative price of imports, that is, relative change in the price of imports and domestic goods, an increase in imports associated with relative price of the imports. Thus, if you really see from the analysis given by Da Costa, The volume of imports tends to be very high when there is a conjecture of high rate of economic growth and a sharp fall in the relative price of imports and vice versa. There are thus a number of economic factors which affect the business as per se.